Welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to talk about burnisher and slicker tools. We're going to look at what they are. We're going to check out the different variations and what to keep in mind when looking to purchase one. And then we'll give you some tips on using them and what can work best for you in your studio. So with that, let's dive right in. So leather burnishers and slickers are usually rounded or curved tools, and they're used to burnish the edges of leather to kind of smooth out that edge surface. Because leather is a natural fiber, so when we cut it, these fibers then become exposed. And so that becomes way more prone to absorbing like dirts and oils, and then even fraying and becoming weak because it's essentially an unreinforced part of that leather. Whereas the surface, has that original strength to it, we now have an exposed side. So to handle that, what we typically will do is use a burnisher, and that will apply heat and friction. And through that heat and friction, it'll begin to kind of bind those fibers together. And we could use that in combination with some other substances, such as very popular, the toconol, and beeswax is another one. And some people will use water. It becomes a very personal preference in terms of what a crafter likes to use when burnishing their edges. Yet for the scope of this discussion, just keep in mind that the burnishing tools can be used along with another agent to then help strengthen those edges even more. Though looking at the edges itself, we'll use that friction and heat and then start to kind of smooth out and create a more dense, less penetrable, tougher edge on that leather. So there are all kinds of options available in terms of burnishing materials. So let's check out some of those and see what is best. So first we have a plastic burnisher. These are generally the least expensive, and they can also get hot really quickly. So when you're burnishing with them, you want to keep an eye on it so you're not burnishing too hot or too fast, and that could leave unwanted, even burn marks, on that leather itself. Wood burnishers are really popular. They're probably one of the most popular types of, burnishers out there. And there's different types of woods. So here's like a very basic, natural, pretty open grain wood. And you can see this one I've cut to turn this into a power burnishing bit. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Here's another type of wood. That's a cocoa bolo wood, which is generally a denser wood. And when we're using, this item to create heat and friction, on the piece of leather, a denser wood is going to be better because you want a nice tight grain pattern in that wood to create a pretty smooth, tough surface so that heat and friction can really work on that edge. So with wood burnishers, you could see all the different kinds out there as you're looking, but they generally work efficiently and leave a pretty good result. There are also brass burnishers, and brass and metal burnishers are really strong, right? They're generally going to be stronger than wood, although they retain a lot of heat. And so when you're using a metal burnisher, you have to be really careful that it's not getting too hot for the leather edge, and that way it's not burning that leather and actually leaving burn marks on it. Because we want to be able to make it warm enough that it makes that edge denser and tighter, but not so hot that we're actually burning and discoloring that edge. If you're using these on a rotary tool, you'll have an easier way to control that speed, and then likely make it easier to not get them too hot. And while we talked about wood burnishers and mentioned the cocoa bolo, there is a category of exotic wood burnishers, of which this is a part. It's generally just a fancy way to refer to woods that are more dense, like the paduk wood, ebony, the vitae, pine, oak, maple, rosewood, pretty much anything available that has a very dense, tight grain pattern, and will make a good burnishing bit. There's also the glass burnisher, essentially a piece of glass which could be used to slick over your leather. Burnishing can also be referred to as slicking. Slicking can also be done to the top side of the leather. So while burnishing is typically done to the edges, sometimes if we want to take the rough side of leather and smooth that out, we could do what's called slicking, and a glass slicker is often used for that purpose, and it'll kind of smooth out these rough pieces. We'll never get as smooth per se as the top, although it'll help make that a little bit cleaner and tighter. Similarly, there is something called a box slicker, and that is essentially a rectangular piece of wood, and it functions very much like a typical wooden burnisher. It's just that it's a block versus a kind of rounded shape to it. And lastly, we have power burnishing machines. And so there are different types available in this realm as well. Here's a pretty common rotary tool, and you'll find these in most shops, even woodworking shops as well. And to use these, we essentially take our manual bit and we put it into the tool there, and it turns that into now a powered burnisher. So this could be really easy if you're doing a lot of burnishing, or if you want a more consistent result, because you could typically, set the speeds on powered burnishers or just rotary tools in general, which are used for burnishing. And then that way you've got a consistent application, of that burnishing to your leather. Something to keep in mind is that if you push too hard with a powered burnishing tool, you could, burn the leather just because it's going to keep going. That said, it becomes very convenient using something like this, because then you're not going to get as tired as quickly, and you can typically get, more consistent results. Along with this, there are much larger tools. There are benchtop burnishing machines. You could often use different sanding machines or rotary machines and putting some kind of a burnishing bit onto them. And so that way, pretty much any rotary tool can be turned into a burnisher, with the right bit and end. So in mid to larger size shops, it can be really effective having, a tool like that to make burnishing, much, much easier. And so those are your main types of burnishers. Let's look at a few different tips to think about when purchasing a burnisher. You're going to look at mainly the range of cost and effectiveness. So your cost is going to be cheapest for, burnishers like this that are your basic wooden ones. When maybe, just a couple bucks, they will work. Getting a more exotic wood that's denser is going to be a little bit more. They're generally going to have a little bit nicer results, and just because of the type of wood that's used, the consistency of the heat that's created. So keep that in mind. And then the most expensive are probably going to be your rotary tools, just because they're, the tool itself. And then you can get bits that go into them, to kind of complete that overall tool setup. So when you're starting out, all you need is something very basic, and then as you get some experience with different ones, you could find your preference. I'll generally recommend some sort of a rotary tool, if not a standalone tool with a high quality bit. There's some really nice ones that even extend out and have, multiple widths within them. And it's the kind of tool you'll typically buy once and have, likely for a very long time. So definitely worth the investment. And when you're looking, most burnishers, including the wooden ones, will come with variations in size. And this will help with choosing one that's going to be the best fit for your leather, so that you're not crushing those edges if it's too thick, or you're not swimming in it and not really getting a good edge if it's too wide. So that variability allows you to pick a width that's pretty close to the leather that you're trying to burnish, and that way you get a nice rounded, smooth edge on it. Also, with most tools, it's true with these, if you buy quality, it'll be a little bit more expensive, but then perform really well. So I'd recommend, going for something that you'll be able to trust, as a quality tool in the shop. And then have fun, experiment with different types, see what works well. Some people burnish with water, some people burnish with a piece of canvas. There's all different ways to apply friction. These are the most basic, these are the most common, and there you have it. So if you have questions, let us know, and until next time, keep crafting.